policies and procedures, and we've kind of been hitting on that in different ways throughout the day, how important it is to have the right relationships identified and have the right contracts in place. And again, as we start going into this, again, you know, and with the discussion earlier, I want to make sure you all recognize that USIP is not an insurance company that is here to try and find ways to, you know, that we're going to tell you that you can't do things certain ways. And, you know, Luann joked that Johnny came out and said we couldn't do that anymore. Well, I said they couldn't do that anymore because they wanted me to say they can't do that anymore. You know what I'm saying? You get in those situations where people are saying, oh, well, we've always done it this way and we want to keep doing it this way, and the commissioners are like, we don't want to be doing it anymore. Johnny, will you please come out and tell us we can't do that anymore? And I'll be happy to be the bad guy from Salt Lake that comes out and tells you you can't do something anymore, or that you have to replace the bleachers because you can't have the handmade bleachers that somebody made in the time.
Wave, come on, let's rock a little.
But you know, we're here because the commissioners created us so that they could do things that they can't do when they use insurance companies. Because you know, the number one exclusion to a municipal insurance policy as an underwriter for many carriers over the years is an exclusion to fairs, rodeos, demolition derbies. All of those things are excluded in a standard general liability insurance policy. You don't get coverage for that. You have to go out and spend a lot of money for special events coverage. You go through the coverage agreement that the commissioners and the counties have agreed on as far as when they get to access the funds of USIP to pay their claims. You don't find any limitations for fairs, for rodeos, for demolition derbies, because it's part of county government. It's part of what we do. And so the funds are there and available for it. And as we're going to talk over the next hour about the things that need to be in your contracts and the things that you need to limit people from doing and limit yourselves from doing, understand that we're doing it because there is a finite amount of money that the commissioners can put in the USIP account. And we're just trying to manage that money in the fund to pay the claims that they really end up having to pay. Where we can find other people who are responsible that should pay a claim, we're going to try and make them pay rather than the county pay. Because every dollar that comes out of USIP, make no mistake about it, that's the county is paying for it. You're all self-insured. You're just self-insured together. And so we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can with these contracts to transfer the loss to someone else if they're in control of the situation, or limit the liability of the county as much as possible. Because again, that's how you continue to get support from the commissioners, is that they know that you're working with USIP, that you're looking at ways to try and reduce the cost. Because, you know, as I worked in other states, boy, when I'd go to the board and explain that we just paid a $2 million loss that arose out of a county fair, the question was always, do we continue to provide coverage for fairs? And how do you not provide coverage for a fair when you're the county pool? I just don't ever want to be there where our commissioners question whether or not there needs to be exclusions to the county fair and county fair type events in our coverage. That we just shouldn't. It's something that we do as counties, and we need to continue to support. So, but let's start looking at the types of things that we call upon the county attorneys to help us out with when it comes to protecting the county. And we've got Neil Geddes from Davis County Attorney's Office and Jody Borgerson from the Washington County Attorney's Office that's going to help us. They provided me a bunch of sample policies and procedures and contracts that they use in their counties, some that directly relate to the fair, others that are from their areas but are used in the same capacity at the fair. And that we're going to go through some of those contracts and stuff kind of make sure that you understand what you need to be looking for to identify, is this something I need to send over to the county attorney's office? Is there a problem with this? And things that you want to make sure that if you're one of the county attorneys that like Dave was talking about earlier, that's not going to spend a lot of time on your contracts if they don't have to, like I know Dave and Jody do in their respective counties, that you have some idea of how to direct the county attorney's time to the most important things. And to put a little framework around it before we actually start looking at the documents, let's talk about the different people that we need to have contracts with and agreements with. Who do we need to deal with? Number one is the public. You got people coming onto the fairgrounds to attend your event. Are they exposed to injury and property damage? Absolutely, they are. Fair is not a safe place. We make it as safe as possible, but we're creating hazards. You know, a lot of people that come to the fair, it's the only time of year they're exposed to livestock. The only time of year that they're exposed to carnival, yeah, things of that sort. So we need to look at how are we dealing with the general public when they attend the fair. One question at the end, Luann talks about how they don't charge to walk into the fair. Does anybody charge to walk in the front gate? Thank you. As soon as you charge to walk in the front gate, you got rid of all those nice little amenities that Dave talked about earlier. And
what if you charge to park in your parking lot but not to walk in the front gate?
we just need to be careful with that because the courts will look at, is that a ruse? Are you not charging to walk in the front gate? You're charging them to park because you know that you're just trying to sidestep that loss of the immunities. If they think so, they could pull your immunity. Right? The recreational immunities is what I'm talking about here. So if you're charging for parking and they're parking in a spot that really doesn't cost the county anything for them to be able to park there, then that's going to be a hard argument to make in court. In your facility, I mean, the county spends some money on that parking area. And so to charge to have people be able to park in that area close to the event is reasonable, and to say, you know, I know that's the way the state gets around it in a lot of areas, is that they charge for the parking, not to be able to go and recreate on their property. Mm-hmm. So, again, just be careful with it, that the charge for parking is a reasonable amount for the parking, and you're going to be able to argue in front of a judge that you're not really charging for the event by saying it's a parking charge. Now, you're going to have different events during the fair that you charge for. And again, those are the ones that we'll look at is who's really charging. Is it you or is it the event manager that's charging you? Again, we want to protect those recreational immunities as much as possible. But the public, if at some point you are going to ask them to have a charge, and even if you're not, it's always good to at least provide them some fair warning of the hazards by way of signage and placards, things like that, because we do want to deal with them and make sure that our duty to them has been addressed. Okay? Then we've got exhibitors, just people that come in and put stuff on display. We need to deal with them differently, obviously, than the general public, right? So you're probably going to have a different way of dealing with exhibitors than you are with the general public, as you will with contestants or participants, as you may call them. That's a whole different animal again. They're entering some form of contest, and they might be both an exhibitor and a contestant, that they're exhibiting their livestock, but they are also entering it into the contest to win some prize money during the fair. So you need to deal with them in those two different capacities. Vendors that you're allowing onto your property and giving them permission to sell their goods to the general public. Again, if you're treating a vendor the same as you do an exhibitor with the same agreement, you're probably not doing the best job of managing that risk, because they're two very different types of exposure there. Service providers that service the facilities, these are the people that you're actually contracting with to service the facility during the fair. The people that you contract with to bring on the porta-johns, the people that you hire to set up the lighting for the stages, people that you hire to a whole host of different areas that they are actually providing a service to the fair that you are paying them for. That becomes a much easier one for the county attorneys because they deal with those types of vendors all the time. Attractions. You all have different events and attractions, musicians, petting zoos, things like that, that you're simply there to draw in more attendance, right? And again, that's a different relationship. They're not necessarily there to make money. You're maybe paying them something to be there, to be an attraction, to draw people into the fair. So you are asking them to come rather than letting them be on your facility. So it's a whole, again, a much different relationship with that type of an attraction than it is an exhibitor or a vendor. You see the difference? And you need to make sure that you're able to explain to your county attorneys which one of these types of relationships you have with someone for them to make the decision of how are they going to structure an agreement with them that's going to protect the county, but do it reasonably and protect the other party's rights too. And event managers, the rodeo guys, the demolition derby coordinator, all of those types of event people is again a much different type of relationship than some of these others, and these are going to rise to should rise to a higher and more professional level. As somebody that's coming in and saying, I'm going to coordinate and set up and run the demolition derby for you at your fair, you're going to pay me to do that. You're going to take part of the gate of the demolition derby if I come in and do that for you. That's a professional relationship that person should be coming with their own special insurance. If they are telling you they know how to set up the demolition derby and run it as a special event, they should have the proper special events insurance as an organization to cover that event, that you need to be a part of that coverage.
What's ran by your search and rescue?
That's why I say should be, Joelle. Because, yeah, that becomes a problem. Are they really qualified to manage that event? And because they're not professionals at it, they don't do that as an organization normally, where does the liability fall? They don't have a special events policy. They probably can't get a special events policy because they're going to go to K&K or one of the specialty events markets where you buy that type of coverage, and they're going to say, hi, we're the Wasatch County Search and Rescue, and we do the demolition derby for the fair, and we need to buy a policy. And the underwriter at the other end of the phone is going to laugh. They're not going to issue a policy to somebody who doesn't do that as a living and know how to do it right. So where does that fall? The county. Anything goes wrong at the demolition derby, the county's going to pay that claim. That's okay. Just understand that's what you're doing. And don't set yourselves up to have the commissioners say, that's it, fair's over, we just paid $1 million loss because of the demolition derby that we didn't realize we'd be on the hook for. That's the last Wasatch County fair. That's where you don't want to be. So those are the things you gotta weigh. Because I know a couple commissioners like that, unfortunately. Not necessarily in Wasatch County. They're looking for a reason. And then participants from the general public participating in sponsored events, they're going to the demolition derby. Somebody who's coming into the fair and walking through the bunny barns has a whole different risk, right, than somebody who's going to the demolition derby. And so the way that you treat that person needs to be different from all the rest. Do you see how much we're asking of these two? All of a sudden, that you cannot write just one contract or one policy that's going to cover every situation. You really need a whole package, a fair manual of contracts and policies. And real quickly, with all those people, what do we need to deal with? We need to deal with potential for injuries. That's the one that people think about most quickly. So we need to deal with injuries to the public, injuries to employees, injuries to contestants, injuries to both our employees as well as the vendor's employees and the event manager's employees. So there's a whole bunch of different types of employees within that group. Property damage. How many of you have had one vendor's property damaged by another vendor's negligence or an act of God? I know several of you had, because Corby's paid the claims. So we need to look at how are we dealing with the potential that the county's property is going to be damaged, the general public's property is going to be damaged as they're attending the fair, or an exhibitor's property is damaged. And so somewhere in each of the different contracts that we have, we need to address that. We need to address other liability, like Dave talked about, the discrimination, the harassment, all of those sorts of things. Again, people that we need to protect for that are the general public, that they're not being discriminated against or harassed while they're at the fair. Your employees, your volunteers, vendors, employees and their volunteers, the contestants to the different events, that the event managers are treating and taking care of the contestants properly. The exhibitors and the vendors, they all need to be dealt with separately. So, was everybody expecting one sample contract to go over and be done with this today? It ain't gonna happen. Okay. The one that we haven't talked about at all today, but I think is important and we'll look for as we go through these documents, is also the theft. You know, we've talked a little bit about, you know, we take the gate and then we pay 50%, or we get up and we get the first 20% and then they take the next. But the real question with all of that is who's collecting the money? Who's tracking the money? And if you're saying, okay, event manager, for the demolition derby, you collect the receipts at the gate to the arena, and when you're all done, we'll count up the receipts, and the county's going to get 50% of it. Well, at the end of the night, when they go to open the money box, if it's empty, no one knows where the money went. Is the county okay with? They're going to get nothing because the event manager's employee walked off with the receipts? Or have you protected yourself somewhere in an agreement to make sure that whether or not their employee walks off with the receipts, you're still getting your 50% of the gate? That's another area that I think we miss quite often in our agreements, because I don't think you're going to want to go without getting paid because somebody else stole the money. So requirements to have bonds and those sorts of things would be important. So let's take a look at some of these agreements. Let's see. I know that both Neil and Jody, this is a work in progress, and they have thick skins. Obviously they are because they're attorneys. So we do want to pick these apart and make sure that we're addressing it correctly. And of course, this is going to be really hard to read. We're starting out, and remember our list of who it is we need to deal with? And the first person on the list was the general public. None of the agreements that Jody and Neil sent me in preparation for this dealt directly with that aspect of it. It's what do we do to memorialize our relationship with the general public? So I anticipate that neither Washington or Davis, again, because they just let people in, there's no charge, that there is no contract per se with the general public. But there might be some implied contracts. I mean, first of all, when you step onto the fairgrounds, the courts are gonna say, there's an implied contract that you're gonna keep people safe while they're on your fairgrounds. But you can modify that again by putting up signs. You know, if you have any type of a ticket system for parking or whatever, you can have a waiver on the back of that ticket. Certainly you could have the waiver to release you of any claims for any damage that's done to their vehicle or anything that's stolen from their vehicle on the back of that ticket when you sell it to them. But you may also have a release for them entering into the fair, that they recognize that there's dangers at the fair, and they accept that risk as they enter the fairgrounds, or have that sign at the fairground entrance, that they're accepting that risk. So the next group that was on that,
Can I just say something?
yep,
I just found out from Wendy, we actually do have this posted on our website, for the patrons themselves, but we are,
and that was my question
Not
for you, is
posting it in-
when you say patrons, what's a patron?
I interpret it as anyone attending the fair, but.
So the general
we need
public.
to make that more clear.
Okay, because as I read through this, I wasn't sure, it seemed like that maybe the patrons were exhibitors, but I misinterpreted that. Patrons are,
No, and you know what, this has been part of our premium list, like when somebody brings a quilt, in our booklets, all the classes that they have that they can enter, this has always just precluded all the rules and regulations of people bringing things. So, yeah, it was here before I came, so I don't know if we should still include that with our exhibitor's handbook.
I think it's fine, because again, you spelled out some of the requirements or expectations of a patron throughout, and you've also done this liability waiver. What it says is that in no case shall Washington County, the Washington County Fair, officers, agents, employees, board members, volunteers, or any other associated be held responsible for any loss, damage, injury, liability, claim, including death, disability, and death, or any property or person coming upon the fair area. So more or less it's just saying, again, you enter the fair at your own risk. The county does not assume any liability for your participation in the fair. That's good.
So what happens, okay, because I've seen her book before and it's huge. So they're not gonna read all of that. And so, but by giving, you know, and who gets them? Does every person that walks out of the facility get one of those books? Because I mean, she puts an awesome book together. You know, it's fantastic, but so how do you do,
Well, what I'm going to start doing is Jody suggested that I have it blown up and posted on our fairgrounds,
good idea.
you know, and then it's on our website. So whether they read it, it's their own choice, right? It's just really their own.
It's gonna help us defend a claim that when somebody says, well, I had no idea I could be bit by the bunny in the barn. and my child needs to be, you know, I'm gonna sue because my child was bit by the bunny in the barn and somebody's gonna pay. Well, you know, for us to say to the judge, look, Judge, we warned them that there are hazards here at the fair and told them that they enter the fairgrounds at their own risk. It will help us in our defense. I'm not saying it will do is a cure-all, but it's one more building block is we're trying to find ways to defend the county. And certainly, again, most of the time, we only have to rise to that level of getting our immunity. So we only have to show that you weren't, what's the term? It's not just simple negligence.
Deliberate?
It's, yeah, it has to be more deliberate. So for you to have provided that warning will help show the judge that you weren't indifferent. You did do something to help make sure that people understood that they need to watch their own kids when they're at the fair, because there are hazards at the fair.
I have kind of a dumb question, but the minute we start doing this, because, yeah, we're not doing it, but the minute we start doing it, does that just open us up for lawsuit?
No.
Is it better play dumb than play?
Ask forgiveness, take permission.
Yeah. It just makes me nervous that it's the minute, you know, when people see you start doing this, they're gonna think, oh, we can sue the county.
Well, they always can,
Right.
like they
But I
said.
don't think it'd be
They
so,
can, it
yeah.
may not,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, when they
But
start
our
seeing,
county.
Oh, yeah, it's got to be
a lot of people feel that it is all the signs and all the waivers that you have to sign off on and everything that has made us a more litigious society. Maybe so, but that's what we're left with. So I think the proper thing to do at this point is to protect ourselves from it. Neil, Jody, do you have any other thoughts as far as how much of that you want to be doing?
So is that some
Well, I went
language?
to law school, so I'm obviously in favor of indemnification and at your own risk, but.
The question about if we do it here and if you put up signs, I mean, there is a limit to how much you want to be doing, and I know I have a comment later in the process, that you want to make sure that you're getting this language in the right place. And for somebody who's just coming onto the fairgrounds with a quilt and that you don't have any other contract with, this is an okay way to do it. But for a vendor that is coming on and you're allowing them to sell food to the general public, a statement like this in the rules, in the vendor rules, isn't, from my standpoint, isn't adequate. Do you agree? That should be in their permit, that you don't get to sell food to the public unless you sign that you agree that you're not going to sue the county and you're going to hold the county harmless, okay? So again, it depends on who it is you're dealing with as to how you and where you put that waiver. Neil, Jody, any other
So I just
comments?
clarify my last one. As a lawyer, I'm risk averse, so I always want if I need to put like all of the fine print and everything, but I do realize that sometimes it may be too much, so.
It's fine to put it in more than one place. Again, one of the things that I found in some of these agreements is that it says this contract is the entire agreement between us. No other agreements apply. And so if you put that in a short one-page contract format or two-page contract, and this the statement of that you're releasing the county of liability was in the rules or someplace else, and the contract said nothing else applies, you just gotten rid of your ability to use that statement in the rules. So be careful with that. If you got it in the rules, I agree with Jody. Repeat it in the contract is the way to do it. So next, we go with from the public to exhibitors, and here's an example of Washington County's exhibitor contract. And you can see they collect a bunch of information about the exhibitor, provide them some information on how the charges are going to be done. And as you go through and read all of the terms and conditions of that agreement, you'll find here Jody's language regarding the, again, that more or less the same statement that we saw with the patrons, that the exhibitor agrees that they are gonna hold the county harmless, indemnify and defend them from any and all claims that arise out of the exhibitor's participation at the fair. If the exhibitor does something and somebody sues the exhibitor and decides to name the county as well, and the county didn't do anything other than to have let this exhibitor on the fairgrounds, they should pay your claim for you. That's what this is asking them to do. And then, not only does it deal with the liability against the county, but it also deals with, like we talked about, the property exposures, that the county is not going to be responsible for any damage to the exhibitor's property. And there are other places in the agreement where they're held responsible if they damage the county's property. Okay, so from an exhibitor standpoint, somebody that's just simply coming onto the county fairgrounds to show off their quilt, to show off their livestock. Have we covered all the bases? We've taken care of the potential for loss of property. We've taken care of the potential, for both the injuries and other liabilities through this statement. And we haven't dealt with the money risk, but I don't know that there would be a money risk here with an exhibitor. We covered those guys pretty well.
Should all counties be using the same verbiage? I mean, should we all be having the same, like, what, indemnification clause? Or does every county have to word it differently?
Every county words it differently just because different county attorneys have their own language that they've learned over the years that they like to use. We've not pushed that from USIP's standpoint. At the end of the day, if we see lawsuits where the courts are denying protection for the county because they use bad indemnification language, at some point that might be something that we work with the County Attorneys Association, that we really need them to all standardize their indemnification and hold harmless and defense language so that we know that the court's going to uphold it. But I review those for the county attorneys that send it to me, and generally they're all using language that's acceptable to the courts, that yes, it's clear that you meant that they were going to pay your claim. I get really nervous when I see the old, where the Latin starts to creep in and all sorts of things. That some of the older language that the courts will say, the other party couldn't have been expected to understand what that meant. That's what you want to be shying away from. Comments from you two?
All of this was written for me, I just updated, so I can't take credit for it. And you were good, but I'll take credit for the bad.
So we go to the next tier. We talked about the public, we talked about exhibitors. The next one on the list was participants. So here is a copy of the Washington County Fair's Demolition Derby participant and hold harmless agreement. So,
Like drivers?
Yeah.
right, so the kids participating in the mutton busting, every event that you have, you should have some form of a release. Kids are a little more difficult because kids can't sign a release. Legally, they can't be held to that release of liability. That doesn't mean you don't still have a waiver for the parents. The parents can still waive their right to sue the county. you may need to wait 18 years for the kid to come of age to sue you. You can't do anything about that, but at least you can have the parents agree that they aren't going to sue for their own loss of, you know, the losses that they sustained as a result of their child being injured.
What about just like, this maybe don't relate right to the fair, but like your facilities, like, shouldn't you post right at your own risk at your fairgrounds anyway? I mean, what's the liability there if you have a rider down there riding and gets hurt in your arena? It's not during the fair, but they pay a user fee to use their arena. I mean, what kind of sign should we have? I mean, I don't know, what do you do there?
But you have them fill out an application form or something to allow them to come in and use the
We
facility?
probably should have them go waiver right then.
We put up just last year, in the code, I think, I can't remember who gave it to me, but we just put the verbiage from the code just right on a sign and we
Post
posted
it
it
in
all
the
the way
arenas.
around the arena and in the sales barn.
Okay.
Yes. They're-
But a waiver or something would be good when they pay their user fees the first year, huh?
Yeah, because I think, don't we have like an application type thing that they need?
We have a waiver for user fees. Okay.
If they're renting the building, if it's like a person wants to really go and have the whole family come, then they fill in their rental application.
That's what I'm
If
thinking.
it's just a person that wants to come and pay $5, or just, our horse days are free now because we have so few horse riders, but they still have to sign a waiver.
Okay. So we don't do anything
So
like that.
How often do
And
we
again-
update the waiver forms? I mean, how often should we be doing that, yearly, or, because we make them do it yearly, but I've got 100 of the same person, person's
Same
waiver
person.
form. Can we do it every so often, every few years or something?
Depending on how you structure the waiver, I think you could structure the waiver so that it's good for more than one
Year.
use of the facility. But you'll just want to be careful with that the waiver, that they won't be able to make the argument, I signed that waiver like 4 years ago, how could you possibly think that I expect that's still valid? So if you make another charge, an annual charge, it's an annual favor. If you are charging them every time they come in the facility,
So we don't charge. The only thing that we charge for is events. We don't charge for the general public to come in on the facility.
You haven't had a team ropers fight yet over?
Oh, yeah.
but Joanne has the answer when you're talking about horses. There is a special statute that says if you post this notice on a sign at the location, you have immunity. But you have to word it exactly according to the statute. So make sure that any of your facilities where people are using horses, bringing horses to your facilities, that you put up your signs with that language from the statute on it. You don't have to worry about waivers. You don't have to worry about, any of that. The statute provides you.
Yeah, but what is that?
I can't,
Is that
I can't remember, but I looked it up.
Yeah, I'll have to look it up, because I know I had sent
Yeah,
it to
send it to
Joanne when
me.
she had asked about it.
Well, we did that for the same reason that you're asking, is because we have people using our arena all the time. We don't charge them a fee, but there's horses down there every single day.
We charge, but they're breaking colts. I mean, they're doing some, some.
The only time we charge them is if, we have to turn on the lights.
So is the statute changed since they first, has it changed?
I don't think it's been modified
Okay,
for the,
because we've got, we did
so-
ours,
no, we've
Quite a few
given the
years ago.
language and the citation and stuff at this event in the past. But I can look that up and get it back out to you.
Yeah, listen, we don't have anything down there, so
I just, as, carte blanche, any of the county facilities where people bring their horses, I just get that sign put up there.
Well, and Johnny, I think that there's a couple of words in there, if I'm not mistaken, because we questioned whether it was not, if it was just about equine animals. And, I think that it covers a little more than that.
It might be broader livestock. But that's a good question. that's the way to handle that one. So again, participants haven't waived any claims against the county. Even again, if the event manager's running the event, the search and rescue guys that are running the demolition derby, make sure that they are getting everyone to sign a waiver, because they'll probably, if they're a professional professional event manager, they're getting a waiver so that they can't sue them, the event manager. Make sure it also says that they can't sue the county as well as the event manager. Dave?
So this is be a long question for Neil. This probably has, I don't know if this is a fair question to ask. But when you're doing something like that, let's go back to the rodeo guy. If we're changing our thinking and saying, you know, you're paying us for the privilege of coming here, but we'll run the ticket office, or we'll, in the demolition derby, we'll run the bleachers, you just run everything else. Is there a point where you're too commingled that now, hey, you know, that's just some wording in a contract, this is really, you really have run the event and that guy just got to get a fee. Does that make sense? Can you include too much of your services in that agreement?
Yeah, that probably definitely become a point where we are too intermixed. That's something we need to look at, so we have a clear separation as to what they're doing as far as managing and running the event, and what we're doing is just simply hosting or providing the facilities.
Yeah, because like in any other area, you're gonna, again, you wanna identify what is the relationship, who's in control of what. In that situation, they're in control of the riders and the participants and stuff, but you're in charge of the crowd. So if somebody gets injured because there wasn't proper crowd control on the bleachers and people stampeded off the bleachers and got injured, why would the event manager have to pay that claim? That was your responsibility. You took responsibility for overseeing how the bleachers were going to be used. So in the agreement, you should agree to indemnify and defend the event manager for claims that arise out of what you're in control. And that's why you'll see a lot of cross indemnification agreements back and forth. Lots of people like to use them in every event, but it depends on the relationship. If you start getting that more of a, they're not in charge, we're not in charge, we're kind of doing it together, that's fine. And you gotta let these guys know that so that they can spell that out in the agreement as far as we're gonna indemnify you for some things, you're gonna indemnify us for some things.
And I think the key is to making sure that what we're agreeing to indemnify them is limited specifically to what we've accepted responsibility for. A lot of times these entities that we contract with, they insist upon having an indemnity clause from us as well, but they want it to just be general, where they kind of cancel each other out. And so, as Dave knows, we've tried in most instances to take out any, we're just having them identify us, and we're not putting in that same clause, reciprocating it back, except for, there's a few exceptions where people really insist on it, and that's where we just need to be very clear that, okay, we'll indemnify you, but in the example we just talked about, for any accident or injury that occurs relative to crowd control, or, however you want to word it, so that we're not being ambiguous as to what we're actually going to cover.
There's a couple of things that pop in my mind here is, when we have our demolition derby, we hire a person to organize and promote and run the derby for us. And then they have their drivers come up, and for insurance reasons, they have their own waiver, and we have a county waiver for the drivers to sign. And I think we just found out the other day with our baby show, we have a hospital that sponsors a baby show, and we have our own little waiver, and they have their own little waiver. Are we, if we're saying the language, in our language, the baby show's the hospitals, and the derby's the derby guy, but yet they're both signing our waivers, does that just make a marriage to where, no, it's your event, they signed your waiver to be a participant in that event?
And does it matter if it says like Juab County Fair diaper derby